We also met with the existing board of the MNIB, and we would have held discussions with them and indicated to them what their mandate would be over the next 6 months. And given that we engaged in public consultation, we wanted the public to hear from us firsthand the decision that we've made coming out of the consultations, both internally within our respective ministries and in light of the discussions we held with the public, and particularly the stakeholders who have had a relationship with the Marketing and National Importing Board over the last several years. So that's the summary of the position. We're happy to have any questions that members of the media may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Prime Minister, for giving us that thorough roundup of all that happened that led to the final decision as it relates to Marketing and National Importing Board. I now invite members of the media here present to pose your questions to the panel. We do ask that you say your name and your organization, and you address whichever of the ministers at the head table. Those of you online, you can show via the show of hands, and we will come to you as well. Yeah, sure.
I think you need to adjust it.
Good afternoon, Callistra Faria, The Narrative. The $15 million in debt approximately that MNIB owes, does that also take into account what is owed to the insurance companies for the health plan and the pension plan that was not being paid since 2019 despite the deductions? What sort of exactly what is the commitment that government has given to the union about returning what was taken from the workers to them as far as the health and insurance is concerned and pension is concerned?
Thank you. I can't answer whether the approximately 15.1 includes the non-payment of pension contributions or any other contributions towards the employees. So that we will have to verify. Part of the challenge with the Marketing and National Importing Board when we assumed office was frankly the lack of records from MNIB itself. And I'm saying specifically financial records at the standards one would expect of a statutory corporation. We have given the commitment to the union and to the employees. Not only will we pay the severance, but that if we need to top up and make good any aspects pertaining to other employee benefits which have not been paid or which were deducted, we would do so. That includes any payments in relation to the pension. I believe the pension is with Sagico. So any contributions which were not paid, we would ensure that those contributions are topped up so that the employees are not placed in any disadvantageous position. If there are any contributions that were not paid to the National Insurance Scheme, we will ensure that those are paid as well to ensure that the employees are not disadvantaged.
At the time that you made the decision to wind up Marketing Board in its current form, what was the value of the MNIB's assets?
Right,
and also, but this is a two-part question, and also you were having consultations just recently. Were those consultations, did they have any bearing on the decision you've arrived at now? Because it seems to be a pretty quick time between the consultations and announcing that you're winding up.
So let me answer the second part first. Yes, they did have a bearing on the decision we made. The truth is we summarized the bulk of the recommendations which came from the consultations. And in a nutshell, I think putting it in one sentence, persons recognized that the existing MNIB had served its useful life. Having said that, they also recognized that there was a need for an entity that will still help to address the issues that farmers are confronted with. Particularly that is the issue of food logistics, the storage, the distribution, the preservation, and the finding of markets for farmers' produce. And when we say finding of markets here, we don't mean after the farmer has produced. We mean before the farmer has produced, because the critical issue that we face here is that there has to be a clear connection between who is the eventual end buyer of the produce before you start to produce. So we need to get away from a situation where you simply grow tomatoes because you feel like it, and then after the tomatoes are produced, you are then trying to find a market. We need to find the market before to ensure that when the farmers start to plant, we can guarantee him that there's a market for the produce, and the same goes for the agro processors. So we recognize that we needed to find not just the challenge of how we stop the bleeding with the current MNIB, but that we also find a solution to continue addressing those issues that we've raised. And the truth is, as it stands, given the failure of MNIB, there are serious questions about the capacity of the government alone via a statutory body to do so, which is why we want to get the private sector involved, which is why we want to have issues such as potential working capital being brought in by the private sector, as well as management expertise to help drive that process. The valuation, the first part of the question, the valuation, we have paper valuation for the current assets of MNIB is $18 million. 18. And that's essentially the valuation of the properties, because there is really no goodwill, because as it stands, MNIB is unable to pay its debts. So really there is no, other than the fixed assets and whatever inventory it currently has, basically the valuation is the land and buildings and the fixtures in the buildings. So it's 18 million.
Thank you very much, Mr. PM. We now move to our colleague from GBN via the Zoom platform. GBN?
Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity. Afternoon, everyone at the head table. My question is, would there be, as the present employees, would they be given an opportunity in that new entity as perhaps first preference in terms of regaining unemployment?
The answer is yes. We certainly intend to give any employee who is severed the opportunity to, certainly the first opportunity to be rehired if they meet the necessary criteria for rehiring.
I do have another question as a sense of clarity to farmers and perhaps giving them a sense of security. What can they do at present now if they do have produce?
They can continue selling to MNIB on the assumption that the MNIB can pay them. What the mandate to the board will be over the next 6 months is incur no liabilities, incur no losses. If the government is going to take over all of the existing debt of the MNIB, we are doing so, and we expect that in the 6 months while we transition, that the revenue derived from the operations of MNIB will meet its obligations to third parties. And so we expect, therefore, that certainly as of the 1st of March, when this becomes operational, that when farmers sell to MNIB, that MNIB should be in a position to pay them, because in effect, the only obligations MNIB will essentially have would be to these persons that it is buying produce from, and the overheads associated with the purchase of and storage and eventual sale of the produce. The bulk of the staff will no longer be employed. Those outlets which are being rented from third parties will be closed, so you don't have rent payments and lease payments and additional overheads and so on to meet. So it should, in fact, put the farmers in a better position to be paid by MNIB during the 6-month period while we transition.
Thank you very much, Christina. We now move to Ms. Nancy Maguire via the Zoom platform.
Good morning. Can you tell me on the where you're looking for this private sector investment in a new entity? Are you going to limit it to Grenadians, or are you looking further afield? And how much is it going to cost the government in the long run to handle all these debts? Thank you.
All right. Well, we are not limiting the search for private sector investment to Grenada or to Grenadians only. So we certainly would want to encourage and give first preference to Grenadians. And our banks have quite a lot of liquidity, which suggests that there are lots of Grenadians with savings in banks. There are farmers' cooperatives which exist from Carriacou to Grenada. We certainly would want to encourage them to exist. And there are other businesses in Grenada which are currently in the food and logistics business. We certainly would want to encourage them to exist as well, even businesses in the hotel and tourism sector. We would also want to encourage them to exist, because ultimately we want our hotels in particular to be able to buy produce that is grown in Grenada and to be able to use agro-processed produce in Grenada. So we would want to focus on Grenada, but we are not limited to Grenada only. I think I summarized what the existing financial situation is with MNIB and the liabilities we're taking over, which is approximately 15.1 million. The estimated severance for the staff, because we have to have all of this verified, is 2.5 million. So those are the figures we are looking at currently. in terms of liabilities that the government is going to assume. We would want, when we look at going forward, in terms of the PPP, we would want the private sector investment to be the ones bringing in the cash, bringing in the management expertise, so to speak. What the government would have is essentially a fixed asset, primarily the River Road outlet, which is the land and building, and that is the government's intended contribution towards the capitalization of that new vehicle. But ultimately, we intend to retain some equity in the entity. So that's the position.
Ms. Maguire, do you have another question?
When you had the consultations, you had input from a lot of farmers and agro-processors, or some of both. How are you going to involve those as you're going forward? You have these committees, you have the new board, but how are the actual farmers are going to be involved going forward? Is it now that they've said their piece in the consultation? What happens next with their input? Thank you.
Well, the technical working group is comprised of a farmers representative. We also have a representative from Carriacou as part of the technical working group, who also comes from the farming community, and in fact took part in the consultation and was quite vocal in terms of some of the suggestions that should be made. So we certainly expect that the person who is representative of the farmers both in Grenada and in Carriacou will continue in their consultations with the farmers to make sure that they provide the necessary guidance to the technical working group in terms of any concerns or issues or suggestions that the farmers would have.
We now move back to our colleagues who are here with us. I'd like to invite the informer to pose a question to the panel and also MTV.
Donala Hostan, MTV News. Good afternoon to the head table, Honorable Prime Minister. My question, I'm not certain if it's too early to ask this, but for the intended new entity, some of the suggestions that were given during the consultation included improving or having additional markets and additional items. Do you foresee something like that happening under the new entity? For instance, I think somebody said fish and other little products as well. And also, would there be a possible name change so it will no longer be the MNIB?
Yes, well, the name change is certain because we intend to wind down and repeal the MNIB Act, and so the new entity will certainly have a new name, maybe as part of the general involvement of the public. The technical working group may look at asking the public for suggestions as to what that eventual public-private entity name may be. We certainly would expect that the technical working group and the new entity, when they ultimately the new entity when it goes forward, will take a broad approach as to what are the successful areas, or potentially successful areas that it would want to engage in business in terms of additional products outside of just purely agricultural products, where it includes poultry and fishing as well.
Thank you. Kalisha, do you have a second round of questions?
Prime Minister, you are already in talks with anyone in particular to be the private part of this PPP? And can you tell me who they are, please?
Right. So the answer is no. We wanted the technical working group to lead that. So we have not started discussions with any particular private sector. We have had persons express interest, but other than an expression of interest, we've not gone further in the conversation. And the reason for that is because I think we wanted to make sure that we got to this point first before engaging in direct talks with any particular private sector persons.
And are you going to be seeking any sort of public input on who becomes, because the marketing board is not just a profit-making business, it's also a public good kind of organization because of the role it has to play with our agriculture development. Are you going to be seeking any sort of public input on who becomes the private in this public-private partnership?
I mean, I think I would say this, to the point that it is a public good. I think that's why the government has taken the route of going a public-private partnership as opposed to all private. In fact, I would indicate that there was, to some extent, healthy debate within Cabinet where some colleagues felt that frankly there's just too much government, and invariably with government there's inefficiency and oftentimes failure, and a lot of what has gone on with MNIB, which would have led to the Integrity Commission report and all of those things, and that in fact it's probably time for the private sector to lead in this question of food production and food security. But I think we took a more conservative approach because we recognize the public good nature of what is required, and to that extent, hence the reason why we want to be a partner with the entity. And so I would expect that the government, ultimately in whatever decision it makes, will want to partner with someone who, while they are driven by the need to get a return on the capital, will also understand the bigger picture, that this is also part and parcel of a public good, and so we have to have the right balance. So I would expect that certainly the government will probably, as we go forward, disclose to the public who the potential options are in terms of private partnership, and then ultimately weigh the views of the public with any final decision that we make.
What would be the fundamental difference between what we are winding up and what we are creating? Marketing board, what marketing board is today is not what the act requires it to be. So I'm asking about what's on paper, what marketing board was supposed to be when it was created. How is that going to be different from what we're creating? What's the new thing here?
Right. So, well, I'm happy you asked that. One, the legal structure, because as a statutory body, you can't partner with the, you're a creature of statute created by a specific piece of legislation, and you can't deviate outside of that. What we are looking at here is potentially creation of an actual company that allows for the government to be a shareholder with other private entities. What that does is automatically change the structure and the management structure of the entity. Right. Second, what we are looking for is to get private capital to actually invest in that entity. We can't get private capital to invest in MNIB because of the statutory body. We can't issue, as a statutory body, we can't issue shares or anything of that sort. So it actually allows for the public, for farmers, cooperatives, for private individuals or private businesses themselves to become shareholders in the new entity going forward. That means the management itself, they will have some influence on who becomes the managers and the persons who run that entity. And crucially, the question of running the entity in a manner that is self-sustaining becomes even more important. You see the challenge, we are here today because we have a statutory body where the board is essentially handpicked by a minister or by the cabinet. And the reality is oftentimes in this situation, as has happened with MNIB, not just the board, but the management have been picked not on the basis of competence or integrity, but frankly on the basis purely of political affiliation, which oftentimes means there is no accountability. And that is what has happened in the marketing board. So the risk we run is if we continue purely as a statutory corporation, is that we continue in a situation where purely political decisions are made with no consequences to the impact on the entity, where we end up in a situation where farmers are not being paid for their produce. The staff, just so that we're clear, the government has had to pay the staff November, December, January.
155,000.
155,000. That's for nothing. I mean, the government itself is not getting anything back from doing so, right? So if we continue as a statutory corporation, even if we pump millions in, and I'm saying it may not happen for this administration, but the risk you run is that for future administrations, the same thing happens again. You appoint political lackeys. No one has to hold them accountable. There's no shareholders to report to in terms of where are my dividends, why are you spending X amount on jumping on a plane and flying first class to go to nowhere that has nothing to do with the business. And no one holds you accountable. So we have to get to a point where, at least with a public-private partnership, certainly the private partners will want to ensure that the funds are spent properly. They want to ensure that the efficiencies are being driven. And so we need to make sure that as we move, because food itself, the industry itself is changing. There's a lot more experimentation. They focus on agro-processing, how you preserve food, all of those things. We need to have that sort of cutting-edge approach and the use of technology in it. And in the current structure, it is very difficult to do so. So legally, we need to make sure that, to some extent, we future-proof the political involvement that leads to a situation where almost the entire board and the management, for instance, are driven by factors not related to the sustainability or the survivability of the entity. We can't have a situation where people are just being hired and management is being made top-heavy because the taxpayers will pay for it and they're not doing anything. So really it's to ensure that the legal board management is actually changed to make sure that we have a counter-prevailing force, so to speak, to keep the entity efficient. It's also to give an opportunity to the public, to the farmers, to other stakeholders to actually become shareholders and investors in the entity, and so their ideas can permeate through the board and the management as well. And I think thirdly, to ensure that we get the opportunity to use technology and modern management and financing techniques to drive the entity going forward.
So just speak a little bit more to how that mandate that Marketing Board had, which is the marketing of our agriculture and agro products. Is there going to be any difference there? You know, you talked a little bit about using technology to drive it. What's this new look used to be M&IB going to look like?
Well, no, I'm saying, I mean, I'm not going to get into the fine technical details because that ultimately will still be dependent on the nature of the public-private partnership that we strike with any entities. But certainly from where I sit, what I would envisage is that there'd be a greater focus on ensuring, one, that farmers, before they plant, are given the kind of data and the kind of assistance they need to ensure that the market is actually available for what it is they're being produced. So we start backwards rather than the other way we do. Second, there's significant wastage that happens. I mean, by the nature of food, if you can't preserve it, it spoils quickly. And so investing in food preservation, dehydration of food, the packaging, the freezing, the storage, the ability to use the pulp from fruit and so on to go on to make smoothies and all of those things and making sure we find markets for those. We would expect that that aspect of it would be driven significantly by the new entity. They need to try and also encourage us as a nation from a marketing perspective to consume the things we are producing. Is one of the key mandates that we think is important as well. But also additionally and crucially, the finding of markets outside of Grenada for our produce. That mandate, the original M&IB had it. That new entity, we also want to have it as well and to go forward with it because ultimately, if you find markets for or farmers' produce outside of Grenada, it's likely that the price you get for the produce is likely to be better and to be superior. So, I mean, those are some of the areas we'd expect that they would focus on. But it's important that we also have an entity that uses data, that goes out and finds out what is required, what is trending, what people want to buy, what the hotels want to buy, what the hotels are projecting they will need over the next 4 or 5 years, so that we can then get our farmers to produce it, because people taste change. You have health fads, you have all kinds of craze that may come. Hotels may want to promote vegan lifestyle, they may want to promote healthier lifestyle, so we need to know what are the produce that we need to produce. And that data has to be fed to the farmers, and the farmers have to be helped. Currently, M&IB is not doing that. And we certainly feel that the private sector, with the use of technology, the use of data, the use of data analytics, will be better able to help us in that regard than just simply leaving it to a statutory body.
Kalisha, we just interject. Could just hold that last question for a moment. We have a couple of people online and also...
Since I'm here, I'm almost done. My next question is actually to somebody else. It's the Minister of Agriculture. So, I'm giving the Prime Minister
but what I'm saying is you will come back after and ask it.
And I also have to leave. I have kids to go take care of. Can I just ask the Minister of Agriculture, while all of this is happening, as the Minister who deals directly with the stakeholders, the most important stakeholders, of an M&IB or whatever we're going to call it next, what is it that you would like to see happen in this? And after you've answered that, can the Prime Minister please comment on what I am hearing, that we overpaid pensions? Is it true? Is it not true? What are we doing about it? And how did that happen, if it did happen?
Well, maybe before the Minister of Agriculture answers,
Thank you, gentlemen.
I'll take the response. I think my face, I've never heard that. This is news to me.
I always ask you questions you've never heard about before.
No, I've never heard that. That pension have been overpaid, I've not heard that. No one has reported that to me. The Ministry of Finance, nor any pensioner has raised such an issue with me. So it's the first time I'm hearing this. So I'm certainly prepared to ask the Minister, the PSN Finance, if he's heard any such comments, or if anyone has been kind enough to say I got $10 when I should have gotten $5 and I'm returning the $5, but I'm not aware of that.
But I've been getting a lot of messages about that and actual numbers being quoted, so I felt it was serious enough for me to ask the Minister of Finance whether or not we did make such an error.
No, I'm not
So
aware
if we haven't, thank you for responding,
yes.
sir. Minister of Agriculture, thank you.
Thank you very much, Calistro. In the face of all of this, we believe that the farmers have a critical role to play, and we understand the importance of Marketing Board. We know definitely it plays a critical role in terms of marketing farmers' produce. One of the things that a new entity will be going into is the whole question of agro-processing. This will be an arm that they will have to look at in regards to helping the farmers. But as you will realize, we have started the consultation process in terms of coming up with this plan with the farmers. And we'll continue with the consultation process in the whole question of revamping the Marketing Board. There are farmers, you have to realize that the farmers most of them are basically private enterprises, private entity. And it is time for these private entities to really come up and be part of the marketing process. It has not been like that in the past. The private entities were selling to Marketing Board, which was a public corporation, statutory body. And the farmers basically didn't have a say in the end product. In this new entity, the farmers will have a critical say in terms of going forward. And the Prime Minister did outline that they too will have the opportunity in terms of being part and parcel of the new enterprise that we are thinking of. So the farmers definitely will be registering their presence in this new entity.
And as a Minister of Agriculture, I'm sorry, as a Minister of Agriculture, you will make sure that the private profit makers.
Well, I'm part of the government, so what has been outlined by the Prime Minister, I'm part and parcel of it, and I would not deprive the farmers of having the share.
We would just like to say thank you, but we do have some other members via the platform who we'd like to engage at the moment. Okay. Okay, so viewers, we now move to a question to you, PM, that came in via the live, and the person is asking, now that you've reached this stage in terms of MNIB, will you be requesting any further investigations as to what actually led to this demise, or will you just let it rest?
Well, I think the issues surrounding the demise of MNIB are well documented. The Integrity Commission did a pretty exhaustive report, which I have. There is a version of it that's online, and I think anyone who doubts what corruption and mismanagement does to state entities and by extension the state, MNIB is a classic example of that. So we as citizens need to ask ourselves if we are going to stand by and continue to allow situations where in our very face, because the deterioration of MNIB has happened in our face. We've stood by and watched it happen. Right? Notwithstanding that MNIB has a monopoly on sugar and dry milk. It still can't even, in the circumstances in which it's been placed, pay itself for the sugar and the dry milk. It can't pay its employees. It can't pay the farmers it is buying produce from, for the most part. And so that is what mismanagement, that is what corruption leads to. And the Integrity Commission investigates, but we need to move past the question of investigating. We appreciate that it rests with the Director of Public Prosecutions to ultimately decide whether they prosecute anyone. But the fact is, if it is clear that it was wrongdoing, it might be. And we have to get to the point where people are in fact held accountable for their actions when this sort of thing happens. I can't go and arrest anyone. I can't go and tell anyone to arrest anyone. That's for the police. That's for the Director of Public Prosecutions. But the reality is there has to come a point where there is some reckoning where when people behave badly in public office, and I don't just mean as politicians, when you're entrusted with statutory bodies and so on, if you don't comply with the rules, if you mismanage, if you steal, or if you misuse the state's funds for your own personal benefit, that you be held to account. So to that extent, whether it means having to strengthen the law in relation to the Integrity Commission and its ability to either initiate prosecutions, we will have to look at some of those issues. But the reality is we have to go past just investigations and then filing a report and then no one is held to account. So I agree with the general sentiment that I think the question is pushing.
Okay, thank you. We now move to Ms. Linda Straker via the Zoom. Linda?
Hello and good afternoon to all. My question has to do with the River Road outlet. With all the other outlets closing down, can the Prime Minister explain what exactly is going to happen at the River Road outlet for the public? How are the public going to benefit? What is going to happen there? And secondly, it appears that the report of the Integrity Commission contributed to the final decision made by government. Can the Prime Minister say to us whether or not, based on what has happened in MNIB and we have the Integrity Commission report, is there any other statutory bodies that will most likely end up having the same fate? right now because we have over 20-something statutory bodies. We have incidents or evidence of some actually falling for the same misappropriation, if we want to use that term. Can you tell us, please?
Sorry, I think I need you to repeat the questions to make sure I'm clear on what's been asked.
It's a two-part question. My first question is, what exactly is going to happen at the River Road outlet now, seeing that all the other outlets are closed? What is going to happen there? What will be its purpose? And secondly, from what you're saying, it appears that the Integrity Commission report contributed to the final decision made by government. Are there any other statutory bodies that government is going to look to wind up or wind down or change because of what is happening financially to that statutory body?
All right, I'll take the second question first. As of this moment, no. There is no other statutory body that is under consideration for being wound up or closed down or changed. The first question relates to what will continue at the packing house in River Road. We anticipate that for the next 6 months, that the packing house will continue to be the place where farmers' produce are bought, stored, packaged, ultimately distributed for sale.
Linda, do you have another question?
Maybe.
Linda?
When I spoke to the chairman last Thursday, he mentioned that MNIB do have the license, the monopoly for the importation of sugar. Will that monopoly be given to others, or with the potential repealing of the MNIB Act, what will happen to that monopoly? What is going to happen with regard to sugar?
The monopoly remains in place with MNIB for the next 6 months during the transition period. We have made no determination as to what will happen when the new entity comes into place.
The other thing I need to ask, now in 2014, the government of Grenada established a policy for public-private partnership. Will your administration continue referring to that policy, or you're developing a new policy when it comes to private-public partnership?
Well, the answer is we have not developed a new policy as it comes to public-private partnership as well, as yet. So we will cross that bridge when we get there.
Thank you, Linda. We now move to Nancy Maguire, and then she'll be followed by Nisha Paul, both on the Zoom platform.
Hello again. You make reference to the technical committee that's going to be doing quite a bit of work over the next few months on this issue. Can you tell me who are on that committee and what associations they represent? Thank you, sir.
I will not disclose the individuals, but I will simply tell you, in a sense, we have a chairman, we have a member from the Chamber, Grenada Chamber of Industry and Commerce. We will have a legal representative from the private sector. We'll also have a legal representative from the Attorney General's chambers. We will have a farmers representative from Carriacou. We will also have a farmers representative from Grenada.
Tanisha Paul. Oh, Ms. Maguire, you have a follow-up?
Yes. The Minister Thomas said there that he's going to be continuing the consultation process with farmers. So how is that going to happen in collaboration with this unnamed committee? Thank you.
I stated earlier that given that both Carriacou and Grenada has a farmers representative on the technical working committee, that we would expect that these individuals will obviously be the ones carrying the consultation between the farmers and the technical working group. I mean, we simply cannot conduct business where every Friday we sit with 100 or 150 people to have a general discussion about the same topic over and over. So obviously we have to get to the point where we can have an individual representing the farmers being part of the technical working group so that they can provide the insight to the technical working group on behalf of the farmers.
Okay, so we now move to Nisha Paul.
Good
Nisha, are you there,
afternoon to
sir?
everyone. My first question, I would like to get an update on the cap on freights, and also the visa access is one of the major attractions of the CBI program. What sort of impact do you foresee the recent changes we're hearing about now in the US and the UK regarding citizenship by investment having on the projections that were made in the budget in terms of revenue collections under the CBI?
I'll answer the second question first. The assumption is that visa attraction is one of the key aspects of the CBI program. I will answer this. Grenada is the only island that offers a CBI program currently that has an E2 visa treaty with the US. And St. Kitts, St. Lucia, Antigua, Barbuda, all have CBI programs, and perhaps in the case of St. Kitts, not perhaps, theirs has been the longest and one could perhaps argue the most successful. They don't have an E2 visa treaty with the US. So the assumption that persons come to Grenada and are attracted to the Grenada CBI program because we have an E2 visa treaty, in my mind, is an assumption that the data does not clearly suggest, because no one else has it. That does not mean that there may not be someone who may say, okay, our program becomes less attractive because the fact that I may be able to get to the US faster is now hindered. But we do not anticipate, and certainly Grenada does not market its program on the basis that because we have an E2 visa treaty with the US, that's the reason for applying for CBI citizenship in Grenada. The fact is, and you can research it, you can see the amount of countries that a Grenada passport allows you to be able to enter with or without a visa, as the case may be. And essentially that's the strength of the Grenada program. The other strength of the program is the fact that we do extensive due diligence so that the persons who do get a Grenadian passport can feel satisfied that they belong to a group of Grenadian citizens who have been through a very rigorous DD process and are satisfied that when they are moving with a Grenadian passport that they would have the comfort and ease of doing so. I think the numbers already suggesting that we will meet our CBI target, and so from our perspective we are not concerned, unduly concerned over the fact that the US law now requires someone who's obtained a CBI citizenship to be resident in a particular country where they have been for 3 years before being able to qualify for the E2 visa entry into the US.
Nisha, do you have a follow-up? If not,
no, she had asked about the cap on freight. Well, the cap on freight is due to be reviewed in March. So that is coming up soon. When that review takes place, we will then decide whether we need to keep the cap on freight or whether the freight has dropped to allow us to continue with the current freight rates.
okay, we now we'll take the final 2 sets of questions. We move to GBN and we'll followed by Linda Stricker. GBN? As the reporter is Crystalline, are you there still? If not, we move over to Linda Stricker.
I'm here, Sherry. Sorry about that.
Okay, go right ahead and pose your questions.
Okay, I did send it in the chat. I thought you had access to that. So my question is to the PM, based on his travel, what are some of the issues that you're hoping to raise with the Canadian Prime Minister?
Yes, well, the Canadian Prime Minister is scheduled to be a part of the CARICOM Heads of Conference. One obvious issue is the question of visa-free access for Grenadians to Canada. We certainly feel that there's no justification for continuing to require Grenadians to get a visa to travel to Canada. In fact, I think from where we sit, I think that there's no justification for a Grenadian to get a visa to travel anywhere in the world, because we really do not think that our citizens pose any security risk, any social risk to anyone. For the most part, Grenadians either travel for leisure, tourism purposes, or they travel to study, or they travel to work. And clearly, if they're traveling to work, they will only do so on proper documentation in the particular country in which they're going. So I don't think there's any Grenada is not a place where people are persecuted. It's not a place where people are fleeing any political, social, or religious issues. We don't have an army. There's no risk there's no political, social, or economic risk, I think, to any country posed by Grenada. And so we really don't think there should be any visa restrictions on our citizens, particularly to a former colony of the UK and a former member of the Commonwealth. So we certainly would be raising that issue with the Prime Minister of Canada. Second, we also will be, in fact, looking to lobby Canada and other countries so that they understand what our CBI programs are about, so that they can, in fact, help support the continuation of the programs and to push back against some of countries who may have a misconception about what the CBI program is about. So we would certainly be looking to get their support for that. We also would want to address with the Canadians the situation in Haiti. I started off by making reference to the fact that we currently have Haitians here that we are looking to send back. But the reality is, I think, as CARICOM, and given that Haiti is part of CARICOM, we have to accept that a sister nation of ours is in serious and dire straits, and it impacts the lives of the citizens, and you understand why citizens would want to move or leave Haiti. And I think, therefore, as a region, including Canada, the US, and CARICOM, we have to come up with solutions to address the migration situation that the challenge poses in Haiti, and ask whether or not there should or should not be a policy in place for us to receive some of the Haitians in our respective islands to assist our brothers and sisters in Haiti in the meantime. We are also aware that there are Grenadians who go to Canada to engage in short-term farming, particularly with things like the picking of apples and other produce and so on. So we certainly want to ensure that Grenadians continue to get those opportunities as well. While obviously tourism, the tourism market is another area that is of particular interest to us, between us and the Canadians. And so air travel is one of the challenges that we continue to face, and that is something we certainly want to look at to see how the Canadian government can help. And then finally, I would say technical assistance to help build our capacity in several areas that we believe the Canadians may be able to assist us with. So those are some of the issues we expect to raise with the Prime Minister.
And thank you. PM, before we move to Linda Straker, we did mention that it would be our last question, but we have two colleagues that is asking if they can pose.
Sure.
And okay. So after Linda Straker, we'll get another question from Nisha Paul, and then we'll wrap it up with Calistro Faria as we speak the question segment. So Linda Straker, go right ahead.
Thank you again. My question has to actually do with the Haitian, the 15 Haitians who are now in Grenada. Can the Prime Minister tell us, one, would it be a case of signing a deportation order to send them back? Secondly, can you give us a breakdown as to who are these 15 persons? Are they persons under the age of 18? Are they adults? How much male, how much female? And when they came from Trinidad, when they arrived, did they claim political asylum? How was the immigration officers able to determine that they would be a burden to the public purse, so they need to be sent back?
Simply the amount of cash they had on them, and what is the average cost of living in Grenada. If you're not a citizen of Grenada and you come to Grenada, you could only be staying at a hotel, unless you're a friend or family. And in the absence of friends or family, then it means you have to be able to afford a hotel, at least for one night. And if you don't have cash or credit card that allows you to afford a hotel for one night, it means you don't have a place to stay. And if you don't have a place to stay, and we let you into our community, what's going to happen? It means we, as a state, will have to take care of you. So the immigration officers, in their normal routine checks, were able to ascertain and make the determination that, in fact, they would become a charge on the public purse if they were permitted to in fact, enter the state. And Haiti is a CARICOM member, and so, in fact, there are very specific and limited grounds upon which you can, in fact, prevent a CARICOM national from entering, one of which is the charge on the public purse, and essentially the second would, in broad terms, be a national security risk. In this case, it was purely on the basis of a charge to the public purse. As I said, this series of events began unfolding yesterday. I have not yet a formal written report from the head of the Immigration Department, but in my discussions with him, he would have indicated There are approximately about 7 females, I think, out of the 15, but outside of that, I do not have any further information on the demographics of the group.
Thank you very much, Linda. We now take the final question from Kalishra.
No, they did not ask for political asylum. They, in fact, entered on the basis of being tourists.
Thank you.
So we now have our final question before we wrap this evening's press briefing.
No, I got several bites at the apple. The Minister of Foreign Affairs, I wanted to find out when we can get an announcement on the filling of the positions at our various diplomatic missions across the world, and if we have a list already, can we find out who they are here, if you have the list with you? And but when the Prime Minister, you spoke a minute ago about our visa, Grenadians traveling, and we do so well overseas and we're not a threat and so on. And you talked about the citizenship by investment program and the vetting of it and the connection with the ban of the visa requirements for Canada. And so you were part of a campaign that was very critical about how the CBI was being done, about the lack of due diligence and the quality of people who were parading around the world in Grenadian passports. I'm not saying you were, I'm saying you were part of a campaign that was. What sort of changes have we made during the last 7 months to improve the manner in which we vet people who are buying our passports?
Yeah, well, I think I'll have to correct you because I don't think I was part of a campaign, nor I part of a group that was critical about the way in which CBI was being run. I think what I was critical about, and we've addressed, is the question of who held our diplomatic passports. That is distinct from CBI. The CBI program, and I want to also be fair to the administration in terms of the due diligence, has always, in my view, been run relatively well. The CBI office retains and pays international due diligence providers. In addition to that, the FIU is also used to vet applicants, and the information that is required on persons, I mean in local parlance, you literally would know if they have cavities or not, because you require extensive health, educational, medical, financial, family and business associates background checks are done extensively on persons. So it's my quarrel has never been with the DD that is done by our CBI program. It has always been very good. In fact, I think most people recognize that perhaps of all the territories, Grenada's DD is the most stringent. My complaint has been on the question of diplomatic passports, where persons in fact were not being put through the same kind of DD and stringent due diligence that you put CBI applicants under, and yet they were ending up with diplomatic passports because essentially they were buying it. And that is not in dispute because the technical fund which was established to a large extent was funded that route, and there were serious questions about the persons who held these diplomatic passports. But secondly, they were not actually doing diplomatic work on behalf of Grenada. It is one thing to appoint someone as a diplomat, to give them a diplomatic passport. It's another thing for them to be actually doing diplomatic work on behalf of Grenada, which is seeking the interest of Grenada, promoting Grenada, trying to bring investment, trade, business, etc. to Grenada. So we from a diplomatic point of view, have clearly made a dramatic shift in that by ensuring, one, that persons actually are going to be properly vetted, they're going to understand what our agenda is, and if they're appointed a diplomat, that they're actually trained, and that they trained and are trained on an ongoing basis, that they oriented properly, that they understand our own internal government processes, they understand our financial accounting, they understand that they are responsible to someone in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, that is namely the accounting officer, the permanent secretary, and ultimately the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and that they can't ignore them and come straight to the Prime Minister because they feel they could talk to the Prime Minister and ignore the Minister of Foreign Affairs or the permanent secretary in the ministry. So we want to make it clear that we are seeking to professionalize or return to a time when the diplomatic corps and or diplomats were viewed as persons who were professionals doing their duties on behalf of the state of Grenada, regardless of whether or not they might have been originally Grenadian or not. So that is the approach we intend to take as it relates to that. I will let the Minister address the other part of the question.
Yes, thank you. We are at a very advanced stage in terms of shortlisting people, looking at proper fits for different missions, looking at what type of skill sets, competencies we're looking for in the people that we are going to appoint to different positions. We have already begun to interview people, and it is not simply a question of appointing ambassadors or consuls general, but of support staff at the different missions. This is very, very critical to the efficient functioning of the missions and to ensuring that they deliver on the mandate that set for them by government. We are also in the process of the internal strengthening of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade. And over the past few months, a number of very highly qualified Grenadians have been expressing interest in joining the Foreign Service or working as trade officers and so on. And as I said, we have begun to interview them, and very, very soon we will be in a position to make announcements. It's a little bit premature at this stage to be calling names. We have to agree terms and conditions with the different people. We have to ensure that proper background checks are done. You don't want to be appointing somebody only to find out afterwards that the country is going to be brought into disrepute. So we are taking our time to make sure that when we get to the stage of making an announcement, that it is properly done. The training, as Prime Minister referred to, has already begun. We don't want to just pick somebody off the street, microwave them, and then call them a diplomat. So we have to ensure that they go through all of the steps, that they understand financial rules of the public service, who they have to report to, who they are accountable to, and so on. So rest assured that in very short order, we will begin to make the necessary announcements.
Thank you very much, Minister. Kalisha, we really have to end at this point in time. PM, are you allowing it, or are we going off?
7 months, the Prime Minister issued a recall 7 months ago. What's happening there? Without the recalled ambassadors still at their posts filling in? What's happening at our missions around the world?
In the main, our missions are still staffed. Most of the former diplomats and so on are holding on as in a caretaker capacity. They are Grenadians. As far as we know, they are not criminals. They are serving the state. And we do not have to go down the same path that others did of unceremoniously dumping people simply because we were not the ones to appoint them and so on. So rest assured that our missions are in good and safe hands, and in due course, they will all be properly staffed.
Thank you very much, Minister. At this time, I know we're just about over an hour. I'd just like to ask our Prime Minister just to make some wrap-up remarks before we end this conference.
Oh, sure. Thank you, Sharon. As I said, particularly for MNIB, the goal ultimately is to make sure that we have an opportunity to reposition an entity that should play a critical role in our food security going forward. That's the ultimate goal. So this fits into part of a larger transformational agenda that places food security as one of the issues we need to address going forward if we are to ensure survivability as a nation. And that's why the focus really is going to be on, as I said, the question of food preservation, food storage, food distribution, ensuring that our farmers have the opportunity to in fact grow new, different and enhanced products, and to give us as a nation a better opportunity to be able to feed ourselves as we go forward. We did not come to this decision lightly. I certainly do not for any second enjoy the fact that we have to get to a point where we have to be severing staff. But the reality is this situation was created by others who had the opportunity to correct it, chose not to do so, are now pontificating when they had the opportunity to do it and did not do it about possible solutions. Well, we are not going to kick the can down the road. We are not going to pontificate as if we don't have the opportunity to take decisions that we think, as difficult as they are, need to be taken so that we can give our farmers the opportunity, in fact, to sell their produce and to be paid, and to put the food security of the nation on a stronger and sounder footing. The government is assuming significant liabilities that are not planned for in an effort to make this happen. And that demonstrates our commitment to, in fact, ensuring that there is a viable future for farmers, a viable future for agro-processors, and a viable future for the food security of Grenada. I want to take the opportunity to thank all of those who came out throughout the consultations and who gave suggestions, recommendations, We certainly would want you to continue to engage with the representatives of the technical working group. We will announce in due course who they are and how you can communicate and communicate with them. We certainly would want to encourage Grenadians, both in Grenada and outside of Grenada, to look seriously at the opportunity of being able to partner with or invest in a public-private partnership that will allow for us to create a unique entity that can take our food security forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, PM. Thank you very much, our colleagues present, and those of you who joined us via the Zoom platform. To all the viewers via social media and GIS Channel 22, we thank you so much for joining us. We hope that though you are more aware of the reasons behind government's decision as it relates to the Marketing and National Importing Board and other issues that came up in this press conference. On behalf of the entire GIS team and everyone who made this conference possible, I'm Sherry Ann Noel, thanking you very much for viewing.